Erev Tov, everyone. This is the review shir on Parashat Vayechi Siyum. We were zochet to complete Chumash Bereishit, which is a tremendous thing. We're very grateful for the opportunity. If you keep smiling at me at that, I'm not going to be able to do anything but look at you smiling. I've got to do something about it. So on the simplest level, the parsha, of course, that was me. The parsha, of course, is about closure. In other words, when we're saying we're making a siyum on Bereishit, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is making a siyum on Bereishit, because this is the end of the story of Bria. We know that that's true because this is the end of the use of the Shem Kel Shakai. Kel Shakai is Misha Amar Lo Olamot Dai, which means that whole ritual phase that the Gemara Chagiga defines as being that sense of in which the world is allowed to find its way. And then there comes a point where HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Go'ercho, and from this point on, we're ready to deal with it, we're ready to work with it, we're ready to enter into a whole new type of relationship with it. And here, we don't hear that shame again, other than when HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I'm not that anymore. Because that's what he says to Moshe Rabbeinu, that's the next time. That there's a description of that shame. That it's true, Vayera Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Kel Shakai. Shmi Hashem lo nodati lehem, and Gam Hakimoti, which means that all of the things up until now are that shame, are that Gam Hakimoti, that's the Brit, that's the Shua, that's the Koach Ma'asav Yiglamon, the Teitan Nachalat Goyim. And basically we've gotten past that to the point in which we have come for the first time in history, as the Zohar points out, in which there's a moment of true shlemut. So that around Mitat Yaakov Avinu are all of the avot, are all of the midot of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Shekhinah is present. And there never was a moment like this, ever. And that's why this is the moment in which Klal Yisrael is zochet Kriyat Shema. Here, Yaakov Avinu says the Shema Yisrael, they say to him, as a response to his own vision of the melody, the Shekhinah that is present upon him. And everybody says Shema Yisrael, and he answers Baruch Shem Kavod Malchut Olam Aved, which becomes built in the strangest way. I mean, who ever heard of the Medrash becoming built into the way in which we have Mikan Zochel Yisrael, the Shema Yisrael. We even say it over in that way, and the Rambam even brings it Halacha. It says over the story, Halacha. Even when the Rambam was giving over Midrashim, as part of the dinim of Kriyat Shema, and that's what he tells us. That there were two levels, one which is Meguleh, which we say openly, the other one which we don't say openly, and which we mention indeed specifically on Yom Kippurim, but then there's a reason for that, as we're going to see as we go on here. So that there's many levels in which this is not simply a matter of closure, but it's also a matter of view to the future. So, on the simplest level, we know that Chazal tell us, Hinei Avicha Choleh is the first time such a thing ever happened. No one had ever been sick. People simply died suddenly. And Yaakov Avinu was mavakesh that there should be such a thing as Choli, because he wanted to be able to be mitzaved. And he turned this into a hanaga in general in the world, which of course, we take a look at the Haftarah, specifically that issue that we focus on. Here we have David HaMelech, who's being mitzaved banav, and in fact is defining the nature of that future. In the same way that Yaakov Avinu over here talks about what will be done and what needs to be done by each one of the Shvatim, as the Medrash puts it. So too does the closure relate to the future. The way in which we close is the reason that now we have to talk about Shimi ben Gera, the way that Shlomo HaMelech is going to continue not only the Melucha, continue the story, continue the narrative that began earlier. This is so powerfully part of the parsha. Certainly not you would have thought that we should focus on, right? We haven't focused on some element of giving a bracha or something. And instead, it's the closure dash future that we focus on. And indeed, we find it in the Gemara. Rabbeinu HaKadosh takes this part of the story as the central description of his own leaving the world, so that it says he was Kar al Atzmo, the same way Vayechi Yaakov Bereishit Mitzrayim 17 Shana, he was Kar al Atzmo Vayechi Yehuda B'tzipor 17 Shana. And in exactly the same way that we find that Yaakov Avinu described how it was that they were supposed to be Nosei HaMitah. Rabbeinu HaKadosh describes how it's supposed to be Nosei HaMitah. Same way that Yaakov Avinu says, don't make sure that none of the Bnei HaKnaanim touch my Mitah. Yeah, and Rabbeinu HaKadosh says the same thing. Make certain that nobody that isn't people that were Mishamish Bilchai should even be Nogeat Mitati. And the same idea of the way that Yisrael should be built around that Mitah. So and so forth. We want every member of Klal Yisrael to relate to that vision, because that's the essence of Rabbeinu HaKadosh, is the Mishnah. And this was the Vayikatz Yaakov Mishnato, says the Gemara, Mishnato, because that's what he's giving us over, that structure, which becomes, of course, Saviv Mitato, becomes the directions in which Klal Yisrael is Chonet Saviv LaMishkan, ultimately in the Midbar, which then turns into our identity, the Doros, in terms of our interrelationship with the Beis Hamikdash and so on, in Eretz Yisrael. So that each one of these elements are actually identified by Chazal and by those that were involved in the same idea of closure and description and building and visions for the future. They took this as being the main idea of what it was that Yaakov was completing. Now, it's also true, we think that, Ish Kibir Chato perhaps doesn't refer to the first brachot. Because after all, Aurora Pamki Az doesn't sound like Afitzim Yisrael, doesn't sound like very much of a bracha, and Pachas Kamayim Al Totar certainly doesn't seem like a bracha, and indeed, as Rashi says, Yehuda, no, come back. Don't worry, I don't have anything out for you, he's already backing up, trying to get out the door. But, the Ish Kibir Chato Berachotar, of course, is it means each one of them got a bracha. There's no way not to see that. And that's the different element, closure, future, but integration is also fundamental. And the integration, which was of course, the first step was how Klal Yisrael was built around Mitato Shel Yaakov Avinu, was also remarkably part of what appeared to be non-brachot, because basically, in saying those words, Reuven Bechor Yata, we get to Parashat Pinchas. It says Reuven Bechor Yisrael and Mishpachat HaChanochi. What do you mean? I thought he lost the Bechor. And indeed, in Divrei Hayamim, it says Reuven Bechor Yisrael, Ubechar Lo Yisrael, and Bechor Atov, etc. How come in Pinchas we didn't know? And that must have been something that was tremendously much Reuven. And as a matter of fact, we know that he was even now remained after those brachot Bechor Yisrael for an amazing reason. One of the Midrashim explains why it was that indeed they were choshed, that Yosef was upset with them. It was because he didn't eat with them. So the Midrash says, why didn't he eat with them? Because it says so long as Yaakov Avinu was alive, he would put me at the table, wherever he would put me. So he had me right next to him. I was at the head of the table. Fine. I didn't feel uncomfortable with that. Now that Yaakov is not here, what am I going to do? If I'm going to sit at the head of the table, which I'm mechuyev to do in terms of being a melech here in Mitzrayim, I can't be mizalzel in that. Or I'm going to sit in front of Reuven, who's the Bechor. What do you mean? In front of Reuven is Bechor. That was given to you. What's possible to say? So you see that the inyanim of Reuven, in terms of the Bechor, as basically the Medrash identifies, there's three inyanim that are involved there. has nothing to do with the fact of your being a Bechor. The fact of your being a Bechor, and that's what Yaakov is saying. Ruvain, Bechoriata, Kochi, Bereishit Oni, you should have had Yeteros v'Yeter. However, because of Pachas Kamayim, Al Totar, you won't get those things. So you won't get your double Chelek. You won't get the Vayitin Holus L'Malkol. You won't get the rights to the Avodah. You're still the Bechor. So in terms of the Chashivut of Bechorah, you remain the Bechorah. I can't sit ahead of you. That means that he's bedavka defining which elements of Reuven retain their Chashivut and removing out the parts that are damaging to Reuven himself. This is what's wrong with you. We're going to end that. We're going to curse Arur Apam, Hashem and the Levi. Take that out of you. What's left are the Mlamdei Torah B'Yisrael. So the Afitzein B'Yisrael. Therefore, Chazal understand by definition. Yes, obviously that's making life difficult. But on the other hand, what does that mean they're left with? The purity of the Torah that was driving them, and that is, as Rabbi says in the Gemara, if you see a tzorba mirabanan that's always angry and always fighting. No, it's the Oraita, that's Mardechai. Okay, fine. So that off we have to get rid of, but that Torah you have to be able to give over. So you'll be the Melamdei Tinokot, and in fact, Levi becomes the Melamdei Tinokot of the essence of Klal Yisrael. The very fact that it ends with V'zot asher diber lehem Avihim means that Yaakov Avinu was aware. This is as the Rabbeinu Baruch explains, it's based on the Zohar as well. That V'zot means Knesset Yisrael. Like V'zot Kolatech from Talat Tamar. This is a reference to I am creating Knesset Yisrael, and that's why he says to them, El Yaakov Avichu. Yisrael and Yaakov are together gods, right? Ma'akadosh Baruch Hu is Borei Olamot. I'm Borei Olamot. I am creating something here. You got to understand that. And therefore, as the Medrash tells us, that word Vizot, Asher Diber, becomes Vizot HaBeracha of Moshe. Because I had to do the snipping and pruning. Moshe Rabbeinu, as the Midrash says, did no snipping and pruning whatsoever. He did only integration. So all of the brachot up until the moment of Vizot HaBeracha were brachot that had to choose different elements, not only between people, within people. That was the new shaykhs that Yaakov Avinu had. Yeah.
Didn't he snip off Shema?
No.
Moshe.
No. Snip off? No. But he's kailal within the other shvatim, but it became integrated. That's the whole point of Moshe. It's not shaykh to snip off anything. That's why it's a different type of bracha. So bracha up until that time was cutting out because it only came from the brecha, as the Sefer Rabbi says, right? So it needed to utilize the same pool of potential. Obviously, if you choose one over the other, then you limit the pool in that sense. Moshe Rabbeinu drew bracha from a completely different place, and so it goes into an old issue. That's why it's the Moshe Isha, who's mitzav on the nature of Bria, and he tells the Shekhinah what to do, so to speak, the way husband Isha, the way husband bosses around the wife, bosses around the wife. And that's what I'm telling you, this is the way it's got to be. Okay. So we'll do it that way. Well, so we have closure, future, integration, all of these things take place over here. Now, what's interesting is that it's also the first time, curiously enough, that the dreams of Yosef are concluded. It's not surprising, because after all, if we're looking for closure to the story, whatever the Toldot Yaakov Yosef meant, whatever those original dreams meant, we would expect that they too would come to closure at exactly the same point that Bereishis and Bria comes to closure as well. Why do I say that this is the closure? Because it's the first time that the brothers bowed down to Yosef as Yosef. Right? So they say, we are ready to be your Avadim. They bow down to him. They say, we are to be your Avadim. So what difference does it make who they bow down, how they bow down? Makes all the difference. Why do you look unhappy? If you're here, you have to look happy. Take the hand down. That's all. There we go. Yeah, smile. Participate. Very good. So if we have two sets of dreams, remember we have two sets of dreams. They're very, very different, right? The first dream, first of all, didn't have Yaakov and his wife there. Right? It wasn't Achadas HaKochavim. He started his brothers. So he says, "V'nei anachnu ma'amim alumim," and what happens? "V'nei kama alumati." Wait a minute. Alumati is not me. Alumati is my avatar, right? So his avatar was food. You all needed food. Your food had to come down and bow down to my food. That's exactly what happened. They didn't even know who he was. So not Baneach, also that avatar. When they had bowed down to that, what happened to the second dream? Where he says, "V'hinei chadatzar kochavim mishtachavim li." Li means to me, as Yosef. That never happened. It only happens here where they know who he is. And they bedavka choose, okay, now we want to be mishtachavim to you. We're going to be avodim to you. Never happened before. Yaakov Avinu indeed is mishtachavim to Yosef. Here. Only here. So therefore, the closure of those two levels, and that's why, by the way, originally, he says, "I'm just here for food." Right? Why he repeats that weird story over here when they're choshen, that we have to see. This doesn't make sense over here. Because they're already mishtachavim as him, right? So why does he try to assert again? I nobody really believes it. It's a stupid thing to say, no? You know, maybe you thought it was bad, but don't worry about it. HaKadosh Baruch Hu thought it was good. And so what do you tell me? Gamzu l'tova, you know? So the murderer shot the guy. Yeah, Gamzu l'tova. Okay, but we should pater him because, I mean, who chashav l'tova? But, you know, HaKadosh Baruch Hu undoubtedly was marshik. I mean, what's going on? It sounds like such a sappy story. You know? What are you going to give him a romantic answer to what?
Were they really mishtachaveh to him only because they were choshen him?
No, we'll see. Yes, okay, so then we said, "Ein mechalom b'litor medelim," whatever it meant, and then. And who do I blame for this? Whose car was it that arrived so late? Sit down. So we've got two different dreams. And the truth is that this points to a very striking pattern throughout the parsha of some type of dualism in which everything has two levels. Some of the dreams of Yosef that begin the story that have two levels. There's just about nothing here that isn't two levels. Let's take a look at some of the really strange ones, right? So we start off the very beginning of the parsha. Relates the chiyut of Yaakov, Vayechi Yaakov. Wow. That itself is the strangest of two levels. Why is the parsha so stuma? Vayechi Yaakov. There's two completely different approaches to why the parsha is stuma, and obviously both of them are addressing one element of this parsha. The one that we're used to is because Nistatmu, Libam, Renehem, Shem Yisrael, because of Torah Sheyibud, and all of this is coming, which is a strange way to begin a parsha of Vayechi Yaakov, which is understood to mean Vayechi, greatest possible excitement, true chiyut, which is what it would be in terms of Yaakov. And the other is, as the Zohar says, the reason the parsha has to be Situmah is because we don't want even a hint of a gap 6. Plus 17 in the Gematria, which was the full life of Yisrael as the first 17 years of Yosef's life, and then the last 17 years in which he was reunited with Yosef. And therefore, the parsha has in it that theme. So it's Kvura in terms of Yosef. Is because in the end, the only way that it happened is because Yosef was Nishba. That goes all the way back to the Eidut B'Yosef, with the extra hay that allowed him to know Shiv'im Lashonot and the Lashon HaKodesh, which Paro couldn't know, which gives us the proverbial shvua that everybody has to make from a melech. But essentially, whoever you're talking about, Tzidkiyahu, whatever the case is, the melech has to be dependent on you in some way. And over here, it's because of that, as Rashi says, when he says, so what's the big deal? Vayechi Siyum Bereishit, so go and be matir the shvua. So Yosef says, is it okay to be matir shvua? I mean, would you say that about your shvua? Never mind. Okay, go ahead. Kasher yishbiach. Go ahead. Okay, so this is the kvura that Yaakov Avinu understands he requires Yosef for, and later on we find Zahava b'nei Sagid land. Seems to be saying that we're all dependent on Yosef to achieve this. He doesn't say a word over here about Marata Machpelah or anything like that, right? He just says, Kuvartani b'kvuratam, bring me to my forefathers. Now, at the end of the parsha, one of the most striking things is a very long speech that Yaakov Avinu gives to the Shvatim, in which he tells them that, look, I want you, Anine Sefalami, Kivru Oti, and listen how many times he says this. It's got to be the Ma'ara, Asher B'stei Afron Achiti. You know which one? The Ma'ara and the Stei Machpelah, the one that's Al Pnei Mamre. Yeah, back there it's Canaan. Just in case you forgot, it's the one Asher Kana Avraham et Asadeh et Efron Achidi La'Fuz Forever. Still confused. Shama Kavru et Avraham et Sarah Ishto. Shama Kavru et Yitzchak et Rivka Ishto. And of course, over here he says something he would never have said to Yosef, because it would have been sort of a slap in the face. V'shama Kavarti et Leah. Now he paid a good price for it. I mean, it was a Miknei Sadeh V'Hamara Shebo. He bought a bit B'nechet. I mean, don't let anybody talk you out of it or anything. We bedavka in a matzav where somebody's a shchivnei, we make it easy for him to see what he wants without having to go through all the details. Maybe Yaakov didn't know about that takana. I don't know, but sure seems to be awfully confused about whether they're really sure about what to do, right? You're still not smiling. My gosh. Okay, and that's the last words that he says. And then it's Vayechal Yaakov etzavot etanav vayasofer g'lav l'mita. That's it. What happened here? Did he no longer rely that Yosef was going to do it? And why is this a completely different kfura? I mean, do we have two kfurot? What in the world is happening over here? So one of them doesn't mention the Ma'arat HaMachpelah. That's all it mentions is the Ma'arat HaMachpelah. Which leads to another question, which is, HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Yaakov Avinu when he was coming down, he says, Anochi alcha gam alo. Mikan that you'll be nikbar in Eretz Yisrael, right? That's also Rashi points on. So when Moshe was told that I want you to go to be Motzi Ami from Eretz Yisrael, and he responds, Mi anochi. Me? So the Medrash understands that to mean, hold on a second. Am I anochi or are you anochi? Because you said anochi. I don't think that's me. There seems to be an identity crisis going on over here. So who's the anochi around here, right? So if Yaakov Avinu was told that, so what's he going around saying? but I'm not saying that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was going to take care of it. I need you to swear. And that was what he said. Don't worry, everything will be okay, and so on. If you're medayik in what Yaakov Avinu said, he never said to be mal and eat Eretz Yisrael. Anochi a'alcha. Never says a word about that. Not to Yosef and not to the Shvatim. All he says is, I'll take Bereni b'Mitzrayim. Okay, how about Sudan? So indeed, we find that the Medrash goes through special reasons. What's wrong with being buried in Mitzrayim? Well, the dirt of Mitzrayim is going to turn into kinim. Okay, so Sudan is all right. Well, in Mitzrayim, they're going to turn me into an avodah zarah, and kishem shedanim et ha'ovdim, kach danim et ha'nevadim. I don't want to be getting into trouble. Okay, in Sudan they won't do that. They don't know bury in Sudan. Well, another Medrash, I'm Yisrael, and I'm called therefore Sed B'Zurah Yisrael. And the problem is that Mitzrayim are also called B'Sar Chamorim. Now you know what you do with a Peter Chamor. You're Podeo B'Sed. Well, I don't want those darn Mitzrayim being Podeo themselves with me, so get me out of Mitzrayim. Okay, fine, but Sudan's not going to. So Sudan should work, right? So as the point over here is not the Aliyah. It's not like he never mentions Aliyah of the Aleph. The first one who talks about Aliyah is Paro to Yosef. Right? Now we're talking about it. That conversation, all of a sudden they start talking about, okay, Paro says, so fine, so go on. Okay, take him up. So all of a sudden we have this vision of Eretz Yisrael. Yosef is talking about Aliyah. He's going to make Aliyah. Yaakov never said anything about Aliyah. Fascinating. So basically he's saying, look, get me out of here. Once we're out of here already, take me to the Kfura of my forefathers. But it's not even tining in terms of the Zechus of Kfura and the Marat HaMachpelah. Now you'll notice that there are two different identities that are requesting Kfura. Because the Kfura that we talk about here is a request that is made by Yaakov Avinu. Vayechal Yaakov letzavot et banav, vayesof raglav el hamitai. The Kfura that was requested at the beginning of the parsha was made by Yisrael. So even though it says Vayechi Yaakov Bereishit Mitzrayim, all of a sudden it changes identities. It told us Vayu Yemei Yaakov Shnei Chayav, and now Vayikrevu Yemei Yisrael Amud. Vayikra Livno Yosef. What's the point of the repetition of Vayikrevu Yemei Yisrael Amud, which is Vayi Yemei Yaakov? You're darn right. You're telling me the whole story of his life. So that means we have two separate identities. Now these two separate identities go on throughout the parsha. In the brachot, he specifically at the end he mentions to the children that he's calling together. He says, "Listen here, gentlemen. Yikapsu v'shimu b'nei Yaakov, but I want you to listen to Yisrael Avichem." So he himself is acknowledging two completely different levels. What it is that he's saying. These two identities. You surrender, or these two identities are so disturbingly different that when it comes to the brachot of Yosef, they don't even seem to know of each other's existence. So Yaakov is happily puttering around with Ephraim and Asher, which of course have been his little grandsons that he's been learning with the whole time, all those midrashim, and they've been trained by him, and it was really nice. And all of a sudden, Yisrael opens up his eyes and says, "Who the heck are those? What is this?" You would think that maybe it points to some senility, except for the fact that the entire story goes on to say everything but, right? It's clear that we're talking about two different human beings. It's Einei Yisrael Kavdu Bizoken, and every reference to Re'iyah of Yisrael is a metaphysical Re'iyah. Einei Yisrael Kavdu Bizoken, Ro'o Panecha Lo Pilalti. Achshav erani Elohim, and I see their future. Mi ela that are not ru'yim lebrachot. And, I mean, you think this is senile. So when Yosef comes around and says, looking at the, he tries to lift up his father's head. So Yaakov says, oh, that's rich. I suppose next time you see a planet approaching, you'll put your hand up. Mr. Superman, right? You silly little boy. You're going to try to move a hand that supports an entire planet. You're crazy. You're not, believe me. Everything you think I don't know, I know. And everything you don't know, I know. I know what the brothers did. I know who they did. I know the Ma'aseh Yudah. I know everything. You guys think you're so smart. You're going to keep it from me. You haven't been around visiting me because you're afraid I'm going to ask questions. I don't need to ask any questions. What a silly head you are. Anyway, now let's get down to business. So we're not talking about Tzedillah. We're talking about a completely different identity. And over there, it's like very Twilight Zone-ish, Yaakov's talking, and all of a sudden, like somebody else is present. So when we talk about these two identities, at times it's mamish shocking. The Gura used to do that. Used to arm wrestle his Talmidim to let them know who was really the one that was strong here. This is the Gura's arm wrestle, the Makar and the parent. So we have these two identities. We have two completely different sets of brachas. I mean, the same way that we have the Shema Yisrael and the Baruch Shem Kavod Malchut Olam, that we discussed at such length in the preparations for Hanukkah, and the way in which there are two madrigot of 24 and 25. One is a Darga Tata, one is a Darga Elah, and so on. We have the same thing when we have these two sets of brachot. We have the not only that he calls himself two separate things, it's Yaakov Avichem and Yisrael Avichem, but we also find that we have the two completely different events of brachot in the parsha. Both of the events are associated with two breakdowns in Ashrat HaShema in the parsha for completely different reasons. So it would appear. One, because of the possible Gilui HaKetz, and that's even one of the reasons at the beginning of the parasha is because he wasn't able to see the case that he wanted to. That really connects the opening of the parasha all the way to the end. And the end has to do with something that seems to be different, which is something's wrong with Ephraim and Menashe. It's very strange because we have to, that's one of the midrashim that says that's why Yosef had to bow down, why he was mishtachave, HaKadosh Baruch Hu can't stand it to see one of the shiftei kah bowing down and therefore falling to the floor. By falling to the floor, and because of that, so tirgalti, I was tirgalti at the Shekhinah back into the fake of Yaakov Avinu. I understand, but doesn't that lead Yaakov to have some doubts as to whether these kids are dafka the models? It's like weird. Okay, fine. I'll be mekabel them. We'll take them back. I'll be mechabek. I'll be menashek. But something obvious is not quite up to par. I don't know. Because we have the same kind of thing. And we have two completely different types of brachot, of course. The bracha that appears over here with Yosef is very, very confusing because somehow or other Yosef has arrived with his two sons. Did he know that there was and not any of his other sons? Did he know that Yaakov was going to say, Shnei Vanecha Novadim? He knew the whole thing. What exactly was the issue that he did this? And what's even stranger, the pasuk makes it appear that Yosef gets upset that Yaakov was sikel et yadav, because after all, Menashe is the Bechor. So for heaven's sakes, why didn't he say something at the beginning? Because right away at the beginning, Yaakov Avinu says, Ephraim u'Menashe kiru'uvein v'Shimon Yehudi. And at that point, he has nothing to say. Okay, fine, you want to put Ephraim before Menashe? None of my business. Then Yaakov is sikel et yadav, and he gives a bracha to Yosef. Right? Before he speaks about the kids directly, it says that he was mevarech at Yosef directly, This is after Vaishlach Yaakov et Yemino. Vayavarech et Yosef. Vayomar. Elohim asher yitoch lechotai lefanav Avram v'Yitzchak. Hamalach hagoel oti. I'm being mevorech you in the bracha to the Narim that they should be Yikareh behem shmi v'yidgorov b'kereb ha'aretz. Again, Yosef doesn't say a word. When Yaakov turns his hands, he doesn't say a word. Only when Yaakov is about to give a bracha to the kids directly does it say that Yosef is upset. Vayar Yosef ki yashid aviv yad yamino. I mean, he saw that a while ago. He understands that Yaakov is doing this on purpose because he already said Gefraim Minash. So what do you think? That he forgot who was who all the way back in the beginning? When he says, look, the whole thing is weird. And then, of course, we have to understand what is the point of what appears to be a rambling introduction, which has nothing to do with what he's trying to do. Oh, yes, my son, yeah, I was coming back, and oh my God, Rachel, it was terrible, terrible. Good to see you. You remind me of Rachel. It's been a long time and so on. What kind of craziness this and if it happens, the Torah will tell us all this crazy story. So Rashi tells us, well, I know, maybe you're angry at me. Maybe you're angry that I didn't go ahead and I should have brought Rachel all the way into Beit Lechem. And Burger maybe even in the Marat HaMachpelah, go a little bit further to Hebron when I put in the middle of the road, the Derech Beit Lechem, Dalach HaBani, was Alpia Dibur, I had a vision, I understood this was the whole point of the future, that she was going to be Mitpalillah, and Yesh Schar L'Pulateh, who's the Psukim, and Rachel Metakal Banea, a very, very moving speech. It's always just nothing to do with anything other than the fact that it's calculated, says Rashi, to make Yosef feel better about the fact that Alpha Pisha Ani Matriach Alecha Lach L'Sedim in Eretz Yisrael, but and V'lo Asiti Kein Imcha. There was a good reason for it. But it's a very weird time to start talking about that, isn't it? This is Vayechi Siyum Bereishit. He was already finished. That whole first part of Parsha, that's finished. I already talked about the Kfurah. Now the pasuk makes a big deal about. Now time has passed. So on the screen we have, 3 months later. Okay, I mean that's very clumsy. You only do that when it's absolutely necessary, not to confuse the audience. They're going to say, you actually clumsily put on, and everybody, oh gosh, okay, fine. A little bit out of date, but what can you do? So here we are, and now we have a different story. So now all of a sudden, what Yaakov remembered, gee, I forgot to mention that when he was here last time. He's bringing the kids, looks like he wants to get something. Maybe now's a good time to tell him. I mean, is that what we think? That's crazy. So obviously, we need to focus a little bit on the deeper meaning of that story. So as we've spoken about so many times in the past, the deeper meaning of this story takes us all the way back to the opening word that the Zohar said had to be related to Vayechi Siyum Bereishit Mitzrayim Eretz Goshen, Vayeachazu ba vayifru vayirbu ma'od. Why? Because as we've said, look, this parsha is the closure of the Hanhaga of Kel Shakai of Bria. The story that Yaakov is getting over here is how it is that Kel Shakai was near Eli. That wasn't once. That was 3 times. So first, Yitzchak gives him the bracha and says, Kel Shakai yivarechotcha, because I had that bracha, Kel Shakai. And then he's on his way to Lavan's house. He's going, has this dream, and Kel Shakai tells him, this is the bracha, same bracha that Yitzchak says, word for word. So I'm going to be Mafrecha, Yirbecha, I'm going to give you Eretz Yisrael, and so on and so forth. And then, when he comes back, at that point, where Beit Alai Rachel, Kel Shakai. The last version, of course, was immediately before Yerida to Mitzrayim. Don't worry about a thing. We got it all sorted out. Right? He was always hoping that Kel Shakai would also Mishamalo Amodai, Yomadai Letzarotai. He even invokes the Shem himself, recognizing that the story of his life is somehow connected with the development of the earth itself. It's pretty amazing. Fun. All good. But there's something very unique about that Kel Shakai. Every time that he appears, all he talks about is reproduction. It's prayer of A. It's I'm going to give you lots of kids. And that, of course, is exactly what it was. That was the shame for Brit Milah, obviously related to a generative process. And is exactly going back to Vayifru Vayirbu Ma'od, which becomes the transition from this period to the beginning of Shemot. So there we had, and they were Poro, and they were Yeshritzu, and they were Yirbu, B'mod Ma'od, it's a weird period in which we don't seem to be interested in too many details, just about the fact that there were lots and lots of kids. Okay, and not a very informative story, but then again, neither is the bracha. Because what he says to Yosef is the Yidgul the Keravaretz, like fish. I mean, they got an easy job of reproduction, no hassles, not like fish for Yidgul the Keravaretz, You think Mr. Fish has got to worry about Mrs. Fish, forget about it. So it's all very simple. So that's the bracha I want to give you. Then after Yosef complains, wait, you got it mixed up over here, let's switch hands. He says, I can't switch hands. He's going to have more kids. Like, what? What kind of reason is that not to be able to switch hands? Because he will have a greater population after all, Yigdal mimenu, v'zaro yamalo aguyim. I'm like, this is a very strange way to measure the value of a member of Klal Yisrael. The next time we hear about this is Shimshon. Who cares? Obviously, it's very important to Yaakov later as well. Because when he gives the bracha to Yosef directly, to Yosef, in the middle of the story of the Shvatim, so the bracha to Yosef is unabashedly, openly reproductive. I mean, he talks about wombs, he talks about ejaculate. I mean, it's crazy. Shaddai V'Racham, as Rashi says. Doesn't mean Shaddai V'Racham, which would be bad enough, breasts and it's worse. Shaddai means ejaculation, which shoots, so shadi. And that's directly already a reference, male, female, which is the Targum. The male and female brachot, it's all coming from you. So it's totally focused on reproduction. So this is all part of this Kel Shagai. There's a very good reason for him to be giving over the bracha in that fashion, although strange it is and must have something to do with what's happening in the parasha overall, obviously, okay? So that means that this entire story of the Koach Mahasav, Yidlamot, Nachalat Goyim, is, of course, fundamentally related to the way Kel Shakai functions, correct? Forget about the initial evolution of the universe. We talk about the evolution of the universe. We don't talk about biological evolution yet. We need billions of years before to be able to get to a point where we can even start thinking about biological evolution. We don't have the right materials for biological evolution. You ain't going to build very many organisms out of hydrogen and some helium and so on. There's very simple atoms. What are you going to do with them? Okay, so it takes, a little bit of time, a few billion years here and there, and another few billion years, you got your first galaxies formed. You have only enough, get enough supernovae. In the end, you've got another generation of stars, which are richer in the byproducts of those original supernovae. So now you've got a lot of nice things that are going around because you've already gone through the whole cycle of fusion. So now you've got big, complicated atoms. The big complicated atoms gives you a bunch of a very nice stable atom called carbon. You got carbon scattered all over the universe now. with carbon and a few other little ingredients, we can do wonders. And our first nice crystalline structures, they're not quite alive, but they duplicate themselves, and gradually things get more interesting. So then we start. This is all Kel Shakai. Kel Shakai is, okay, go ahead, keep going, keep moving. Come on, I don't have time for another 20 billion years, get moving now. So, all right, so we go ahead. Now, 13 billion years later, we've got this little chunk of time where it's possible. Okay, that's good. Let's hold it right here, boys. And now let's talk about Brit Milah, the first people that have some brains around here. There's a little bit of contact. Now you guys got to get involved in this process, but this process is, again, unabashedly reproductive, because that's where you get your gene pools, and that's where you get your selections. And it's the same thing as the selections of universes back at the beginning. We got to deal with things that are pretty complex. So we have to let them happen. It takes a little bit of time. I have patience. But now we are ready to end that period. You would expect, indeed, if you're speaking to Kel Shakai, you would sound a little bit like Darwin, Keep up the reproduction. And then that's what you would expect Darwin to say, because that's where it's going to get interesting. Okay, now this would be the end of that story. But, of course, these two sets at two levels and so on are very, very different, and they don't help us in terms of the understanding what it was that these three different things were. And these three different things, again, they start off with Yaakov, and so he calls, his son comes in, and Vayaged Yaakov, Vayomer Yaakov el Yosef. Now I want to give you that bracha of Kel Shakai. I was told that one of my children was going to split into two because I didn't have any children afterwards. And now, Ve'ata, Shnei Vanecha noladim lecha be'eretz Mitzrayim, ad bo'yeh lecha Mitzrayim lihem. Ephraim u'Menashe Reuven v'Shimon Yehuda, and the rest of your kids, they will be part of them. It's after that suddenly he turns into Yisrael. Vayar Yisrael et bnei Yosef vayomer mi eleh. The next stage is Yisrael's bracha to Yosef. Right? What was the first stage? What exactly was Yaakov doing? It was clearly something that Yosef was aware needed to be done, because otherwise he would not have brought those two sons there. And it's obvious what needed to be done, and Yaakov actually addresses it, because what he says is, V'ata, shnei vanecha noladim lecha be'eretz Mitzrayim ad bo'yeh elecha Mitzrayim. What that means is we have a serious problem with these two boys. A very serious problem. It's bad enough that the context in which they were raised, the milieu, the cultural milieu that defined their personalities and their years and everything that they would care about and their values and all of the things that were all developed outside of any contact with Yaakov Avinu and his vision, which is, of course, the central theme here in the Parsha. The Shema Yisrael is describing what it is that Yaakov Avinu sees. I mean, are they really shayach to being part of Yisrael or not? That would be bad enough. But remember, that's just the half of it. The worst part is their names. They are named for the fact that Yosef says, thank God I'm out of that hellhole. I thank God that he made me forget my entire Beit Avi. Now that's a pretty standard kind of thing for children that have had problems back home, right? So when they grow up and they leave home, phew, what the hell were the names of my siblings? Thank God I don't remember. I mean, that's basically the attitude. I don't want to have anything to do with it. I don't want to know from it. It's out of mind, out of sight, and don't let me hear the names anymore. That's what it sounds like. What is he? He's escaping. And then he gives the other one the name for reproduction, right? Period. But the beauty of it is It's in a new country, far away from them. Now we're starting again. We got a new life. So all of a sudden now everything's messed up. Brothers show up, father shows up. I mean, that's what it sounds like, right? Okay, what are we going to do now? It's a real problem. Yosef understands that obviously, as we see in the end, the Simcha Elohim Kefraim Hashem becomes the bracha of Kol Yisrael, then it's clear that what Yosef was doing, and this is what Yaakov was celebrating in the original Ishtach Havaya, Yosef was doing everything that Yaakov was doing, and of course that's the whole story of Yaakov Yosef. The Medrash goes through at great length how every last detail of Yaakov Avinu's life was repeated on some level by Yosef. What Yosef was doing was indeed useful, specifically because it wasn't a new building, and because it did not draw from any of the givens of what had been back with Yaakov Avinu, which had led directly for the other Shvatim to think that they have answers to things and that they can define Dotan, and that they can make all types of dinim and mashbia the shkin and all. Thank God I am out of there. And I must say, nowadays we feel the same thing about plenty of groups in Klal Yisrael. Thank God I'm out of there. So for exactly the same reason. It's very nice to know that all of that is there and that it allowed for the continued growth to the point where, thank God, we can go beyond it. How do you feel? Now, this is what he felt. The question is, am I right? Am I wrong? Is this dangerous? Is it destructive? Is the bottom line that they are, in fact, part of Yaakov? What Yaakov says is, not only are they part of me, they are like my very own children. They're much more than just part of me. They're more part of me than any other grandchildren, even your own.
So that was a specific by Yosef until he says that?
Well, obviously, it needs Yaakov's proof. And the same way that Avram Avinu needs Shem. So that's the whole story of that Melchizedek. Baruch Avraham Elyon. This is that moment, except in a much more powerful, frightening way. Right? Okay, this is the moment of truth. So in giving him that specific bracha, not only that, telling him even your grandchildren, even your children, if they grew up around me, they don't have the same adrena. They don't have to be part of these kids. Oh my gosh. Could you imagine a more incredible Hachanasah? The primaries are these two. Before I got here. After I got here, they no longer have that same mile. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. Okay, so this is all that Yosef was hoping for. You want to put Ephraim before Menashe, do whatever you want. just get him in there, Keruv and Shimon, I don't care. No comment. No comment at all.
So there's an echo here of Lavan who said that this is like a complete opposite. There everything was taking place in the same place. And Lavan said Lihu. And it wasn't true. And here everything is taking place in a different place. And Yosef is accepting it. And Yaakov says Lihu.
Yaakov is accepting.
Yaakov is accepting and Yosef
is accepting. Yeah, it's very interesting.
And the Lihaim and Mi Ela, the Lihaim and the Mi Ela are the same letters, essentially. That one, reading the Parsha here, one literally leads straight into the other.
Right.
First he says Lihaim, then he turns and goes Mi Ela. The same letter, it's the same.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah. Good. So, all right, that's excellent. So, basically, what we have over here, we understand that that's the first madriga, and that Yaakov has to be as Yaakov. It can't be as Yisrael. Because what is going to evolve subsequently into Yisrael Avichem either has taken part of the entire evolutionary process of Kel Shakai that gave all of these brachot to Yaakov, or there's no way to incorporate. You can't arbitrarily incorporate in the nature of Yisrael something that has not gone through the Yaakov. But this was crucial. Yaakov finishes this job, and now Yisrael appears. When Yisrael appears, so now we're talking about the same level of bracha that need to be given to them as primaries. And this has to be through Yosef, because in the end, Yosef, of course, appears in those final set of brachot, which are given by Yaakov/Yisrael. Both identities need to combine now the aliyah from the Madrega of Yaakov to that vision of Shema Yisrael, which in the end is going to define everything. And at that point, we're going to suddenly have the new level of bracha, which will be integrative. And so the next piece is supposed to be the integrative aspect, which is very weird because the integrative aspect of the other brachot, as the Medrash puts it, is to focus on the specific kochot of those shvatim, which goes unmentioned here. All that we care about is the Vayidgu L'Rov B'Kerev Haaretz. But how could Vayidgu L'Rov B'Kerev Haaretz be in any way doing for them the same thing that was done for the other shvatim? As Yisrael, it doesn't seem to supply anything new. It's like pure Kel Shakai level, pure Yaakov level. Very strange. So that remains, appears to be unresolved. But at least it makes sense that now the pasuk stresses the actual physical contact in which he kisses them, he hugs them. I mean, this was not part of anything that we had before. But because the entire idea over here is to be able to create that transition, so indeed Yosef has to take them, be mitpalel, bring them back, give it to Yaakov Avinu, who at that point is vayishak lehem and vayichabek lehem, and then he's capable now of giving these brachot of Yisrael. But
what does it mean, the shakla on Yisrael? Isn't that something very Yaakov?
Yes, so this is exactly what he's trying to do. Everybody else, I had an ability to be able to see them as what they would be. What I see in them, I don't want. His question was, Mi el asher einam ru'yim b'bracha. So what am I going to do? Everybody else, when I saw they were einam ru'yim b'bracha, so I had to go and slice this piece out, and slice that piece out. What am I going to do for them? So I'm going to reduce them to something purely generic. So where do I have a connection to the purely generic? Only through that koach of Yaakov that's absorbed by Yisrael as being totally dovuk to the Ava, the Tzagil Bani, and the connection that I have to El Mazeh. Okay? So Yosef had to bring them physically to him. We'll see why this is important. It's premature yet to go into the details. Keep it for when we get to the understanding of what's really going on. Now, the problem is that none of this helps us in dealing with the unresolved issue. The unresolved issue is what the brothers come back from this brilliantly designed funeral. Why was it brilliantly designed? Because it's not simply that Yaakov never asked to be brought up to Eretz Yisrael. It's much more clever than that. Of course he can't ask for Aliyah before the end of the Golus, which is why Yosef didn't ask for Aliyah before the end of the Golus. When V'ha'alitem, so fine, V'ha'alitem et atzmotem, itchem, fine. There's the Aliyah. So what was he doing? Well, there's a very weird story at the end of the parsha. It's a crazy story. What happens is that they make this massive funeral procession. So we've got Mitzrayim, the leaders of Mitzrayim, they're all going, and then they go up, and now actually on the way up, it says that the brothers were all the way at the end because Mitzrayim came first. And Mitzrayim comes first, and taking up Yaakov Avinu, and then they come to the Goren HaAtad, and all the people are looking at what's going on, and they were coming to fight, and they say, "Oh my gosh, this is Evo Mitzrayim." Evo Mitzrayim. Why would Yaakov Avinu be disturbed by Evo Mitzrayim? Isn't the whole issue over here that this becomes the way that Klal Yisrael was built in the Midbar? You're calling it Evo Mitzrayim. Why? Because the point is that Yaakov Avinu understood that his Kvura would be done as part of Golus Mitzrayim. So Mitzrayim was sholeted on his Kvura. The Aliyah would be when Yisrael goes through the Midbar as if it was the meat of Yaakov Avinu. This is so important that Paro, years later, says to Moshe Rabbeinu, okay, I seem to recall that when Yaakov Avinu was brought up to Eretz Yisrael, so the Pasuk makes it very clear, here's the Lashon of the Pasuk. Pasuk makes it very clear that actually the people that came along, for some reason we need to know this, Vayalimo Gam Rechev V'Gam Parashim and Vayal Yosef Kol Avdei Paro Ziknei Beito V'Chol Ziknei Eretz Mitzrayim V'Chol Beit Yosef V'Echav V'Beit Aviv. Listen to these words. Rak tapam v'tzonam ufkaram azvu be'eretz Goshen. So Paro says, gentlemen, this is not the first time people asked to leave Mitzrayim. I'm a reasonable man. Rak tapam, rak bekarcham. I mean, that's what happened before. Everybody accepted it then. So what's wrong this time? What else is the point? So you see, it's still part of Galut Mitzrayim. That's the whole idea. That's what we're saying. You want to get out of there? It's got to be with the Tapam, with the Bikaram. No. It's no. Rak Bikarcham Yutzag. Is that good enough? Oh, no. It's got to be everything you're going to have to come to. And of course, that's exactly what happens over here. So this is no small issue. What he's doing is he's orchestrating the future on many levels without his having to be exposed to being Neva, to the idea of being in Mitzrayim or anything else. Fine, so there's two completely different issues that are involved here. But after all of this brilliant orchestration in which Yaakov Avinu has been mechaber these two levels, Yosef's Shvua and the Aliyah of the Shvatim, they come back and they say, Luyas Temenu Yosef, as if nothing happened. I mean, this is, we've been talking about all of these years, 17 years beyond the 20 years of the whole story, the original story. I mean, I understand. So we just start, and then Yosef comes up with his ridiculous, we heard that stupid story before. Tell us something new that, makes a little bit more sense. Why aren't you talking to us about, do you forgive us or don't you forgive us? It's Rabbeinu Bachya says. Aaron never says that he was forgiving them. As a matter of fact, he seems to say this story in order to avoid even having to talk about it. Don't worry about it. What do you mean, don't worry about it? We're desperately worried about it. What do you mean, don't worry? Nah, it's okay. I came down here to get you lots of food. We're not interested in the food. We're interested in hearing from you. Yes or no? Doesn't say anything. Says Rabbeinu Bachya, that must be the reason that there was still the Asura Harugei Malchut, because he wasn't Mochel them. If he had been Mochel them, everything could have been Metukam, and yet it wasn't Metukam. Now that makes the whole parasha extremely strange. Here we're talking about this creation of an integration of all of Yisrael. We're waiting for everything to be finished, the closure of it all. And at the end, we're back where we started from. That clearly is unacceptable. So when we get back from Tfilat Arvit, let's hope it's not as big as that event with, Kol Beit Yosef. But we'll do a quick Arvit and hopefully be Zocher to understand more.
It's the same words. It's like a freeze frame straight back to the end of
the instant of Vayigash. Yeah, perfect. Beautiful. Really excellent. Good. Okay, we're off.